Welcome to the Bitcoin Source Podcast, the ultimate destination for everything Bitcoin. We have a remarkable guest with us today, Scott Wolfe, who is deeply committed to improving the health and well being on a global scale and is also an advocate for leveraging Bitcoin for social, economic, and climate justice. We're eager to explore Scott's insight into this potential of Bitcoin as a tool for positive change. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Dawdu. I appreciate those kind words in that introduction. It's nice to be here.
Likewise. So, Scott, I'm always curious to know like where people source their Bitcoin knowledge from, how they got started. So could you kind of start off this conversation by letting people know like were there any books or conversations or courses that you might have taken to really get you started on your Bitcoin journey?
There are books and resources that I've sourced. I didn't start there. Why don't I just sort of tell you my Bitcoin story briefly, as briefly as I can? I think it's somewhat relevant to my perception of how to engage the broader community of folks working in social justice and global health movements around Bitcoin. So I came to Bitcoin at some point in 2019. Around 2018, 2019, I'd made a personal decision to get a bit more actively involved in my personal finance. Before that, I'd been what I think is somewhat common among those of us who are kind of like center left in terms of our politics, working in not-for-profit social justice. It's an awkward relationship with money. Like it's there, we earn an income, we need it, it guides our daily activities, we plan for it, but there's an awkwardness about it, right? Investing, growth, wealth, etc., have a feeling about them that we sometimes think like, oh, those are the things who think primarily about those things, who are preoccupied with those things, etc. And at least speaking for myself, that was my relationship um, with money. But it took more of an active interest in personal finance, investing, et cetera, trying to feel what do I feel comfortable with, what do I want for myself, what do I want for my family, et cetera. I came to do a fair amount of reading around a balanced portfolio and diversifying savings, et cetera, and came across this thing called Bitcoin, right? For maybe the second or third time. I'd heard of it, but I thought maybe this is something that goes in a portfolio. So it was strictly from an investment perspective. It was strictly, this is an investment. This is something that maybe has a number go up, quality to it, et cetera. And so said, what could it hurt to buy $100 of this, couple $100 of this, get to know it. And as once you've got some skin in the game, once something is in your pocket, so to speak, you're going to take more of an active interest in it. And so from there, started to learn a little bit more about it. Started listening to a few podcasts, and gradually came to realize that this thing was much more than I thought it was originally. I started out with that perception of digital money, digital scarcity, and that's where it stopped. But as I started, taking in a variety of podcasts, came to appreciate it for much more than it was. I'd say I started out in the podcast space, listening to stuff from Sitley Bitcoin, from Swan, taking in some videos from Andreas Antonopoulos, and others. And those were helpful in terms of understanding certain dimensions of Bitcoin. But I think what was still absent for me was a bit better grasp of how does this align more deeply with my values? Is this, if this is an asset that has disruptive qualities to it, can disintermediate traditional systems and structures that have had a detrimental impact upon various populations. Like, really, what's the quality of this, and where does it fit in with the work that I do, the things that I care deeply about, people that I would consider, in my network and community. What's the connection there? And I'd say it wasn't really until I participated in the initial progressive Bitcoiners discussions that took place about 2 years ago that I started to connect with other folks who were thinking these same things, and some of whom had spent much more time in Bitcoin and had a clearer grasp on the connection between Bitcoin and as money, and how it can be a source for good in terms of addressing wealth inequality and a variety of systems that produce social injustices. And it was sort of off to the races from there. I kind of found my tribe, so to speak. And I should be careful in saying that, because I think there's way too much tribalism going on politically. So what I mean to say by that is, really just found folks who were really primarily focused with those same things. How does Bitcoin align with our perspectives of folks who are deeply concerned with and committed to issues of social, economic, and climate justice? And really the evolution of my thinking and the resources that I consume, evolved from there.
Yeah, that was awesome, man. It's a great way to start the show, and really, there's so much to unpack there. Like, it makes me think about, aligning those incentives, like you said, where when you come into Bitcoin, it's weird. Like, you really find yourself falling into different categories of people. Some people are pugnacious, some people are arrogant, some people are in it for money, and we kind of align in the same spaces where you have people like John Logan and other people in the space that really are looking to see how this can become a paradigm shifting technology to change the way that underserved communities, healthcare is impacted, things that actually matter in our society. And when I look at some of the things that you've done being an advocate for Bitcoin so far, it was only natural that I had you on this show so that people can actually see a different side of the coin. Because right now, to me, I think like the progressive movement is kind of booming in Bitcoin. Shout out to Jason Meyer. Um, and I think that that approach is really helpful for a lot of people that are on the different political spectrum. They're not far right or left. They're kind of in the middle trying to figure out why this is important. So, having you on here, Scott, is going to be really instrumental to kind of pushing that to the forefront.
No, thanks. I appreciate you saying that. And just in reaction to a few of the things that you said there, one of the things I'm most grateful for in terms of learning about Bitcoin, and many of the folks that's introduced me to, is that it's forced me out of many of my echo chambers. It's caused me to engage with folks that, quite frankly, several years ago, I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have dismissed on surface as, those folks over there who care only about A, B, and C. And I think a lot of that happens, right? Like, we live in a highly tribalized, society, economically and politically. And Bitcoin has provided me, as I think it has a lot of others, an anchor and a means through which to have constructive conversations with folks whom on many other issues we, may or may not disagree. And what I've learned through that experience over the past couple of years, and I'm a work in progress, right? Like, we all come into Bitcoin with our biases, with our perceptions of, what's right and wrong, what a good, healthy, prosperous society looks like or should look like, and how to achieve that. And a lot of that's attached to systems and structures that, are outside of Bitcoin. We're Democrats, we're Republicans, we're conservatives, we're liberals, and there's a whole baggage that goes along with those, and we import those into our engagements. But what I've come to appreciate more and more is that, however this happened, for whatever reasons, and for whatever reasons this continues to be the case, we inhabit this world where that tribalism has taken root, where there's a lot of coded language, and where in fact I think we have this perception that people are more different and disagree on more than they actually do. It's sort of a line that I've been using just to kind of reflect where I'm at. Is I think I've come to see and appreciate. I don't want to overstate this, but I think probably about 80% of people can agree on about 80% of things. Fundamentally, like first principles. What is fairness? What does a healthy society look like? What are our general principles, et cetera? There's a lot of stuff on the margins that we're going to disagree on, but I think a lot of people can agree on the same sorts of things. Most people will agree that something's broken, right? Or that many things are broken. Our political system, our economic system, our policies are just not working for the majority of us. Our sense of what it's going to take to fix them will differ, but we fundamentally agree on that first principle that things are broken, right? And I think we fundamentally agree on what fairness or a better, a better distribution of resources, a healthier society would look like. How we get to those ends is, subject to discussion and debate. But if we start there and we try to engage in constructive dialogue, I really think that the majority of us are somewhere in that middle. And I attribute my ability to see that better and to kind of commit to inhabiting that space and trying to, promote constructive dialogue to Bitcoin. A lot of the folks that I've engaged through this and have disagreed with on, certain social issues, but then when we unpack it a little bit, appreciating that, like, what, we're not that far off. Let's spend some time trying to unpack this a little bit further, and let's start from where we think we can agree, and let's build from build from there. And I think that's something beautiful. That's something magical about about the Bitcoin ecosystem.
I'm really big into people kind of capitalizing off of the skill sets they already have outside of Bitcoin and intertwining that into the ecosystem. And I wanted to ask you, Scott, like, how do you see the integration of Bitcoin contributing to the efforts of community health centers in addressing local social and economic, you know, things that might envision the Bitcoin's impact on healthcare systems, for example?
Hmm. So let me start by describing community health centers a little bit for those who might not be familiar with them and just my role. So I'm currently the executive director of the Canadian Association of Community Health Centers, and I also spent some time as coordinator of our International Federation of Community Health Centers. So working both across Canada and globally, and with colleagues in the United States. Um, as sort of a member association for these community health centers. So the way I like to sort of introduce community health centers for folks who may have zero familiarity with them is just to, relate it to someone's connection around like day-to-day healthcare. People will understand like access to a family doctor or a nurse practitioner, something like that. Like when you have when you want to go for tests, when you're not feeling well, most people connect with a family physician. So the idea of, and that's what we refer to as primary care, right? We have a primary care physician, a primary care nurse practitioner, or other provider. Well, community health centers really take that idea of having access to a routine care provider and build upon them from our understanding that a it takes a team of people to support individuals, and there are people with different skill sets that can, which are differentially able to give us what we need at a given time. You may not need a physician. You may need access to an occupational therapist. If you've got some sort of injury, you might need a counselor, a social worker. You don't need a physician to, do day-to-day shots, right? Like we've got nurses and we have other practitioners. So it's the idea that team-based care is better than individual care. So really, community health centers provide individuals who are able to access them access to a team of care providers, say like the right care by the right provider at the right time. But beyond that, it's really acknowledging that 70% or more of the factors that influence one's health or lack thereof are outside of the healthcare system, right? Are what we call social determinants, right? That's access to housing, income disparities, language barriers, food security or food insecurity, etc. So community health centers integrate services and programs that address those factors for individuals, families, or communities that are generally disproportionately affected by them. So a community health center might be located in a community with lower overall general income, a community that might be a food desert, meaning like there's not access to nutritious, affordable foods, where there's a scarcity of adequate housing, where education or lack of access to education is an issue, et cetera. All those compounding factors that result in someone's poor health. Community health centers will try to take sort of an integrated approach to that. So it's really about taking a holistic approach and trying to focus on how we produce conditions for health, not just treat illness. And so I think from my perspective, there's an incredible alignment between Bitcoin and sort of the system thinking and trying to disrupt broken systems and structures, an alignment between that and sort of the approach of community health centers. Both kind of cut against a dominant paradigm. Community health centers sort of stand in opposition to, traditional, fee-for-service, 5-minute doctor's appointments where it's all about episodic care. Doesn't matter if, you don't have the income to, make dietary changes when you're diagnosed with diabetes. It's like that, this is the, this is the diagnosis. Good luck to you. Right? We know that doesn't work. People need supports. And similar to taking, the way community health centers stand in contrast to that sort of episodic treatment only or treatment focused care, Bitcoin stands in opposition to traditional financial systems and monetary and fiscal policy that don't get us very much as people, that create tremendous barriers and that I would say perpetuate inequities. And so I think that there's a philosophical alignment between community health centers and Bitcoin in terms of like standing in opposition to or in contrast to an inherited system and inherited structures. In addition to that, though, what I would say and where I try to lead when I talk to some of my community health center colleagues, although it's a very slow go in terms of trying to engage around Bitcoin, is that like we're focused on social determinants of health. We're focused on the causes of causes, right? Not just providing a treatment for illness, but to trying to disrupt systems that produce illness and systems that don't allow people to, get that fair shake and achieve health. Those are the social determinants of health. That's housing. That's like I described earlier, food security, et cetera. We spend all this time trying to set up programs focused on these remedial programs to address these factors. We spend a lot of time engaging policymakers around housing policy, income support policy, et cetera. What I've come to realize, I believe, through Bitcoin is that we're still operating downstream. that we need to move further upstream, and Bitcoin lives up further upstream. It's the broken money, it's the broken monetary and fiscal systems that actually largely produce these downstream causes, such as disparities in access to housing, wealth inequality, food insecurity, etc. And for far too long, and understandably, we've been treating those as the upstream causes. They're still further upstream from, that patient or client that you see in the clinic, or that, participant in a program at a community health center, who has a medical condition. Like the housing and income inequalities, those are still further upstream from their medical condition. Those are still further upstream from a lot of the lifestyle behavioral aspects of one's health status, but they're still downstream from the money, to put it clearly. And that gives me tremendous amount of hope, that in fact there is this untended to area of activity that if we dedicate more time to, we can actually have a greater impact by reducing those disparities in housing income, or access to housing income, food security, etc. So that's where I'm trying to take the conversation with anyone who will listen, working in the not-for-profit world, whether it be in the area of community health, whether it's settlement, newcomer and settlement services, housing support services, mental health services, etc. Is let's pause, let's consider that that there's been something missing in terms of the focus of our attention, and let's take that dive. Let's learn about money, let's learn about economic and fiscal policy and systems. Let's restore a true understanding of political economy to what we do, and not just have a sociological, cultural, and thinly veiled economic analysis of like social ills. Let's go further upstream. Let's do our homework, and let's figure out how then we incorporate what we've learned into the work that we do. And I think we're really just at the outset of that. I'm looking for takers. I'm looking for collaborators. Folks who want to engage. I'm a student myself. So I wish I could report that there are these amazing ways that I've been able to incorporate Bitcoin and Bitcoin education into the work that we do. Unfortunately, not yet. I'm at that point, I think, of understanding that I now know what the actual questions are. I don't have the answers yet, but I know what the questions are finally. And so trying to figure out how it is that we, build a cohort of people globally who work in spaces like me in community health, and other social justice movements, and what the next steps are.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've been aware of this, but like you being Canadian, I'm in America, so I'm only seeing this from the other side of the coin. But when you talk about universal healthcare, for example, Canadians kind of have the benefit of having that as kind of a given if you're a citizen of the country. But on the flip side of that, when you tie in Bitcoin, I've been seeing this trend lately of there's a woman that was crying on Twitter. She makes like $40 an hour in Canadian dollars. Um, she has free healthcare, but she can't afford to pay for groceries. The inflation rate is so out of control in Canada right now. People are actually online saying like, I'm ready to move. I'm ready to move to America. Not saying that it's cheap here either, but these are things I've never seen before, like coming out of Canada. And I'm like, Canada, I love Canada. I've been to Canada a couple times. I'm like, Canada's always, people are super nice. Country's pretty clean. Cities are clean. I mean, lately, within the last year or two, it's been getting crazy there. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Like, Bitcoin is needed more than ever in Canada. And it's just insane that people that are making decent money can barely keep their heads above water because of the inflation rate.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the access front or on the healthcare front, yes, I think having access to universal healthcare, having, you know, a public insurance scheme is important. I wouldn't trade it for the U.S. system, as much as some people would like to suggest that privatization is the answer. But what I spend a lot of time with American colleagues working at community health centers, and one of the most common questions is, why do y'all need community health centers, right? Like, you have universal healthcare system. Because in the U.S., there are over 10,000 community health centers throughout the country, often referred to as like federally qualified health centers. They were originally funded out of the War on Poverty in the 1960s and are funded under Department of Health and Human Services, and have historically been to support the medically uninsured in the U.S., like folks who don't have anywhere else to go. And there are people who access using Medicare, Medicaid, some who are uninsured altogether. But that's the general perception, is that community health centers are first and foremost for the medically uninsured or underinsured. And so that cuts against the idea that, like, we would have community health centers in Canada because we've got a universal system. And what I remind them is coverage does not equal access, right? Just because you have a public insurance system doesn't mean that the system and the structures provide access to the types of care that people need in the places that they need them. Doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get access necessarily to a doctor in the community that you live in. Doesn't mean you'll get the right services, etc. So there's a distinction between ensuring access to services so that you don't, so that you don't have to present a credit card, to put it, crudely, when you show up for healthcare, or you've got to have an operation, etc. There's a distinction with that and the actual service delivery mechanism. What I'd say, we've got a lot of work to do on the service delivery mechanisms in Canada. It's not the public insurance system. It's not universal Medicare that's broken, or what we call our universal healthcare system, Medicare as well. It's not the insurance system that's broken. It's really the way that we deliver services. And so we need to get services closer to where people live in the community. Shifting investment from larger institutions towards the community, doing a better job at preventing illness as opposed to investing the lion's share of our money in structures that are focused on treatment of illness. Community health centers are a part of that. So, like, there are broken systems there at play. And, I think that can be carried forward into like a social commentary in general about Canada. That we've got. I would say that we've probably got broader social support systems here than in the United States. When you look at education, I mean, the subsidy of education and the percentage of people carrying massive debt coming out of university education is much lower in Canada than it is in the United States. The disparities between, access to decent public education, those are lower here than they would be in the United States. So the sheer inequities aren't as stark as they are in the United States. And I'd say, a fair amount of that is attributable to our social infrastructure, our public infrastructure. But we're still subject to many of the larger systemic challenges that result from broken political systems, and with poor incentives and broken monetary and fiscal systems. I mean, we are, printing money in Canada just as y'all are in the United States and have been. We're on the same trajectory in terms of underlying causes of inflation. We are kind of victim to the same broken political systems where we run on these short cycles, where all of the incentives for elected officials and candidates vying for office, things are highly centralized through political parties here. So you've got like a package of policies and positions that you, as a conservative or liberal or New Democrat in Canada, need to stick by. Very little free thinking and independence and locally specific, um, um, sort of policy orientation. So highly centralized through political parties, and then these short political cycles where, very soon after one election, you're in campaign mode again. And while we don't have the, egregious levels of money involved in politics in Canada that y'all do in the United States, those things are still an issue here. And people are incentivized to think short term. How does my education or our education policy, our housing policy, our policy on economic development sell from now until the next election? Not necessarily, the sort of longer term thinking and planning that's, necessarily to build robust systems and structures and to and to build a healthier society that we need. And so, from one government to the next, whether it's at the federal level here or at the provincial level, our equivalent of the state level, short term thinking. It's as the Bitcoin world is, as we would say, high time preference, right? Politically, and the terrible incentives that go along with that. And so I think we're stuck in this situation where there are major problems to fix, but the political vehicles we have to do so are running counter to the solutions that we need. Similar to the United States, it's far more rare these days that you'll see cooperation across partisan lines, or if you do, there's a very biting political calculus to it, right? That it's not about cooperation for the greater good. It's something that's been calculated in the political war room as what's most advantageous for the advancement of the party and the ideology, et cetera. So, yeah, costs are rising here. We have a central bank that continues to manipulate money supply and present rationale for inflation that cuts in the face of what we know are to be some of the true major causes of inflation. We have inflation figures that are cooked the same way that they are in the United States, and we have this evolving these evolving problems that we just can't seem to fix through our political processes. And so people are catching hell. Mortgage, those who are fortunate enough to own a property are getting squeezed through, higher mortgage rates now, cost of food, cost of all sorts of other consumer goods, day goods are increasing, and at a minimum plateauing at higher rates. All the while, real wages haven't increased at all or much, and people are hurting. And what we get in response to that from all political parties, quite frankly, are caricatures of who's responsible and how they're going to fix this if elected. most, if not all of which is politicking and not really grounded in I think what many of us as Bitcoiners would appreciate to be some of the root causes of these challenges. And I think that it's that diagnosis, like whether you're whether you're on the left or right side of the political spectrum, I think we can agree as Bitcoiners, in the diagnosis of these broken systems and structures. The challenge we have in front of us is to figure out how we talk to each other, to figure out, where can we agree on what the solutions are and how can we influence policy. I'm getting ahead of myself.
In today's fast-paced digital world, showing your support for the things you love doesn't have to break the bank. With just a few seconds of your time, you can help us at the Bitcoin Source by liking our content, subscribing to our channel, pressing the notification bell, and leaving a comment with your thoughts. Every interaction helps us to grow and improve, and we are grateful for your support. So if you are a fan of our content, take a moment to show your love and help us to continue to deliver high quality, informative content about Bitcoin and the world of cryptocurrency. Your support means the world to us, and we can't thank you enough for being a part of the Bitcoin Source community. Now back to the episode. Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. That was a lot to unpack there. But what about looking ahead about your visions and your aspirations for the intersection of Bitcoin in Canada, and how do you think that this enhanced integration will be better for the global betterment of Canada as far as the way that Canadians approach Bitcoin?
So let me again say that I'm a student, and the way that I approach all of this, or try to in any event, is from that I love that meme, stay humble, stack sats. And I think too many of us approach that as a 50-50 kind of proposition. To me, that's a 90-10 proposition, like 90 on the stay humble, 10 on the stack sats. So really trying to approach it from that perspective, that I think more of us need to study Bitcoin. And that's my, proposal to friends, colleagues, the general public, is I'm not telling you to buy Bitcoin. I'm not telling you to store your wealth in Bitcoin. If you get to a point where you want to have that conversation, fine. But please study Bitcoin, because it's an entry point to, a myriad of important topics that I think need to be better understood. Formulate your own opinion, but, I see it as an entry point to a renewal within society of civic education around topics that are immensely important to you as an individual, but to us as communities and us as a broader society. So I think to the extent that we can get that message across and encourage people to dip their toes and try to figure out, why is it these crazy people are so interested in Bitcoin? What is it about it? Why are they talking about it? And why are they talking about Bitcoin and energy and Bitcoin and the climate and Bitcoin and addressing wealth inequality? And isn't this silly digital money that is laughed at and scoffed at when I turn on the news or turn on a sitcom where they insert it as to advance a punchline kind of thing. So I think if we can get more people just to study Bitcoin, whether they decide to hold it or not, whether they agree that it's something for them or not, I think it can be a really important tool for civic renewal. So, I mean, if we were to achieve nothing but that, what a victory, right? I've gone far enough down my learning journey, though, as as you could tell, as listeners will be able to tell, that I do believe it plays an important role, and that it does provide us the opportunity to restore value to the arena of decision making about what we want as societies, where we agree we should spend our collective resources, what we should be taxed for, and how those tax dollars should be spent, about our place in the world as countries, as communities, et cetera, and that it will, if um, if Jeff Booth's thesis is correct, right, around the importance of a deflationary asset, about everything achieving greater value and being more affordable through as technology progresses, and as it's attached to a sound unit of money. And I'm probably doing a terrible job of explaining that, so my apologies to Jeff if I am. Um, that it provides a signal, again, and will hopefully lead to the definancialization of things in the world right now, restoring things like housing closer to their utility value, as opposed to being speculative investment assets, which just cause this spiral in society where no one can afford one of the things that they need most, right? Because it's been so heavily financialized that it's now an investment asset and not a tool for for good living, for a healthy life. Um, so I really think by restoring value and signal to money and decision making, because there will be a consequence. You can't just pay old debt with new debt and continue to do that. That there's sort of a final stopping point, a decision point, that we can actually like get back to having constructive conversations about the kind of society we want to build, and making hard decisions the same way that any of us would, in a household. You know, there's only so long that we can pay Visa with MasterCard, right? There's only so long that we can kick that can down the road before the lights are shut off and we're bankrupt. Similarly, we've got to get to that point of reckoning as societies. And I think some people will mistake that, or could mistake that, for a call for austerity, and because often that get that point gets presented as a self-serving conservative tool, right? Like, oh, we just can't afford things, and that's code for cut funding for education, cut funding for social services, etc. That's not at all how I mean it. What I mean is really just being able to have constructive social conversations about how we make the best use of the scarce resources that we have as societies. And if we're going to invest in education through our public dollars, and if we're going to invest in a healthcare system, if we're going to invest in housing, etc., how do we do that most effectively, most efficiently, so that we're actually getting what we deserve out of our dollars, and that people can feel that, like, hey, yeah, I'm paying 25%, income tax or more, but I feel like I get value for it. And I'm not just, feeding the coffers that are then used as, the prize at the end of, a toxic, political battle, and are just going to be used towards political ends by whomever gets into office. Um, so I really do think that by increasing adoption of Bitcoin and moving towards a Bitcoin standard, again, we can restore value and signal, and actually get back to the drawing board as societies in terms of figuring out, like, okay, this project of building a healthy society where, each generation does a little bit better and where everyone has opportunity. How do we do that? And here's how we're going to pay for it.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. That was an awesome, awesome conversation about just your perspective and the way that you approach Bitcoin. And I think that I have, ironically, a good amount of Canadian listeners. So I've had Greg Foss on here. I've had some other Canadians on the show. So people do tap in from Canada. So I think I think that your perspective is really going to be far reaching for a lot of people. But before we go, could I get your social media handles if you have any, and any future endeavors that you might want people to know about?
Sure. So I'll handle the second one first and just say stay tuned. There may be a couple things in the works, but I just in general am looking forward to look forward to constructive dialogue. I don't necessarily need to agree with folks. I mean, I'm having regular, up in Canada, I would vote. I'm typically a liberal NDP voter historically. That's where I've found a home, which would be kind of like Democrat, progressive Democrat leanings for a U.S. audience, et cetera. But I've had such brilliant conversations, and I've had my mind opened so much by engaging with my conservative colleagues up here. Have ongoing conversations on a number of topics. I'm a student learning. So that's what I look forward to most. So if there's something about what you heard here, and you are a disaffected, Republican in the U.S., a conservative, et cetera, it was like, I want to challenge you on that, or hey, what do you think about? Then like, let's talk. And just as much if you're someone for whom a lot of what I said resonated, and you're like, yeah, I get it. I'm a progressive Democrat and whatnot. Like, let's talk too. So just in general, let's talk. You can find me at my Twitter handle is Scott A. Wolfe, Wolfe. I'm on Twitter a fair amount. So it's Scott A. Wolfe, Wolfe. And a shout out to folks to connect with me on Nostr as well. I can't read out my public key, obviously, for because it's a big long series of digits. But you can find me on Nostr, and I would encourage listeners, if you haven't yet, create an account on Nostr. Let's move a lot of the conversation over there. Free open source social media platform with Bitcoin integrated. Let's do that. So yeah, please hit me up, and I glad to have this platform to hopefully connect with a few additional folks. And thanks so much for inviting me on, Dawdu. Really appreciate it.
Most definitely. Once again, thank you, Scott, for joining us today on the Bitcoin Source, a Bitcoin conversation.